Hi there. Today we're going to be going over data collection, specifically data collection for duration and frequency of behaviors, and then looking at the graphing procedures for charting that data. If you are looking for information on collecting data for DTT and graphing percentage, that information can be found in the DTT specific video. The first recording procedure we're going to go over is duration. So duration is simply the time elapsed or the amount of time in which a behavior occurs. For duration, the best tool for you to use is the stopwatch, which is found in the clock app of your phone. It's going to look something like this. And then upon the onset of the behavior, you would press start. And then once the behavior ends, press stop. The stopwatch is also great for tracking behavior that happens consecutively, because what you can do is at the onset of the behavior, press start, and then once the consecutive behavior happens again, press lap, and then once that behavior ends, press stop. So then you have the breakdown of the duration of both of the behaviors. First behavior in lap 1, second behavior in lap 2. And you don't have to stop or start, stop, write down, start, stop, write down. You're able to continuously observe that behavior. Some examples where we use duration in ABA is for interactive play data recording as well as for potty training. For interactive play, you may find a graphic organizer that looks something like this, where you have information on the therapist over here, the specific activity, criteria for interaction in the middle, and then your estimated time spent engaging in the activity on the far end. And this would be a great example of data collection where you would use a stopwatch, because it would give you a more precise number of the amount of times engaged in those activities. Other than duration, we would also use the stopwatch if we were tracking IRT or inter-response time. This is a time elapsed between responses, so we would often use IRT to track the time elapsed between vocal or hand stereotypy. And then we would also use the stopwatch to track latency of behaviors, which is the time elapsed between the therapist delivering the SD and then the client responding appropriately. So an example would be in conversation programs. If a therapist initiated the conversation with a question, we would then measure the latency between that SD and then the client's response. For graphing duration, IRT, and latency, your graph is going to look very similar to Olive Caravel's other graphs. The only main change is going to be upon the y-axis. Instead of for percentage, it is going to be broken down into minutes. So for this example, the minutes are broken down into, or the y-axis is broken down into 30-second increments, where 0.5 equals 30 seconds. So for example, on this first day, the duration of the behavior was 3 minutes. And then on the second day, the duration of the behavior was 4 minutes. The next data collection procedure we're going to go over is frequency. And if you ever see a bunch of clickers at the bottom of your client's blue box, that is what these are for. So the frequency of the behavior is broken down into the number of emissions of the behavior, or the count of the behavior, over the amount of time elapsed. So we'll go over the graphing of that because it's a little bit more difficult in a bit. So for using the clickers to count frequency, you'll often have more than one clicker for the behavior, and they will be labeled independent or prompted, because it's important for us to track both emissions of the behavior. So One of the best parts of these clickers is that if you feel comfortable, they do have the necklace portion that you can wear around, but depending on your client's reactivity to the presence of the clicker, you may want to also keep it in your pocket so they don't grab at it, skew your data by clicking on it, or even react differently in the presence of the clicker. And all you simply do is upon each emission of the behavior, click, and continuously click as the behavior occurs over and over again. An example of frequency data collection would be tracking independent and prompted demands per session. So for the example for graphing frequency, I said this was going to be a little bit more difficult because we're not just graphing one data point, we'll be actually graphing two. And similarly to duration, it's important to pay attention to your y-axis because it may change. So for here, instead of 100 opportunities, we're looking at 10. Excuse me. So when graphing frequency, what you want to make sure is you pay attention to the key at the bottom of the graph that your senior will provide. So in this example, we have the dot equaling independent prompts with the X signifying prompted emissions of the behavior. You would then graph as the number of both the number of independent and prompted responses over the number of hours of your session. So for example, if you had 24 independent responses and 3 prompted responses in a 3-hour session, your independent data point would be 8 and your prompted data point would be 1, which can be found over here. So we have a point at 8 and then a point down, or an X down here at 1. Now another thing that you'll notice is sometimes sometimes the number of emissions of your behavior goes off of the top of your graph. So in this example, in a 3-hour period, they actually had 36 independent responses. So you would track that just a little bit above the graph and then put the information on the data collection over here. So it would actually be 12. Another important thing to go over for graphing, not just for duration and frequency, is the information provided on your graph. So making sure that your client's information is labeled correctly at the beginning of your graph. So that would be the program information, your client's name, your senior's name, and then the month and the year covered in your data sheet. This is important so that we have ready access to that information in reporting data. Another thing that you'll notice on your data sheets are what are called baselines, and that's often these squiggly or highlighted lines. Baselines indicate target behavior changes, intervention change, or also long times between sessions. So for example, here we have the NVI target of clap with 3 errorless prompting. So that's signifying the target behavior beginning. We have the data collection here. And then we move on to the second target of the behavior, which is clap, 2 errorless prompted, and then 1 time delay. And then we have the data collected following that baseline. It is important that you do not connect the data points surrounding either baseline because they are data on different procedures of the behavior. You can also use the baseline to then signify the change in a target behavior. So we moved on from clap, then to wave. When making baselines after long absences or vacations for a client, please make sure to check with your senior depending on whether or not that absence of the client meets the criteria for the graphing. As always, if you have any questions on data collection or any of these graphing procedures, please reach out to your senior.